really glad to have you here in Brazil with us. Last time you came, we were talking about the concept of CLIL, the concept of English teaching. Can we talk a little bit more about practical issues right now?
Sure, absolutely.
So what tips do you have for teachers in Brazil so that they can actually teach in CLIL methodology?
Okay, well first I'd rather call it, instead of CLIL methodology, I'd rather call it CLIL philosophy. Okay, the methodology is what the teachers use. What do you do? What are your techniques? What are the things they do in class to follow this philosophy of how people best learn a language? And as you know, one of the ways that people best learn a language is by listening to people use the language. So teachers, please don't talk Portuguese or Spanish in your class or any other language that might be native to your students, because if we're in English class, we really need to be speaking English. And you might say, my kids don't understand English. Of course they don't understand English. That's why they're in English class, to learn English. So the more you speak English, the more they're going to get used to it. So for example, if a kindergarten teacher says in English and Spanish, because I don't know Portuguese well enough to say this in Portuguese, but if in English you said, okay kids, come on, it's recess, let's go out to play. Vamos a jugar, niños, ya recreo. The kids are going to listen to the Spanish or the native language Portuguese and eliminate registering in their brain cells, their memory cells, English. But if the teacher says, come on kids, it's recess, let's go out to play. Come on, it's recess, let's go out. And a couple of kids don't hear or don't understand, and they look and they see the other kids going out for recess, they're gonna get up and go out. The next day, when the teacher says, come on kids, it's recess, let's go out. Come on, let's go out. They're gonna go out. They're learning to respond. And I think what we have to remember practically is that recognition precedes production. A second practical thing, please don't put your seats in rows. Directors, if any of you are listening to this, please don't have a requirement that all the kids are sitting in rows and here are their names. It's not just me. Apple Computer has done research on creativity in the classroom, and they came out in February at a UNESCO conference stating that when kids are sitting in rows, they only see the back of the head of the kid in front of them. There's no interaction, there's no eye contact with the teacher, and they become less creative, less animated, less interested in what's happening. Another tip that goes along with focusing the kids in class, and this happens to be the law in the federal law in Colombia, every teacher in Colombia has to have on the board, on the chalkboard or on a bulletin board or something, the date, the day's date, and 2 or 3 things they're going to do that day. And the kids come in and they copy it in their notebook, so it's like an agenda of what they're doing. Now I was at one school here in Brazil where the school actually does that. It's a lot of work for the teachers. The teacher has to type up what they're going to do that day and the major topics, and they make copies and they cut them out. The kids glue them in a notebook. That's 19th century, okay? So let's start making sure that you start the class, the kids are focused. The date in English, 2 or 3 things you're going to do. Just general things, for example, introduce new vocabulary. Number 2, read a story aloud to the students. Number 3, math terminology, whatever you're doing. So the kids have an idea where they're going. Once you have the kids sitting so you can make eye contact and they can see each other, and you're walking around and circulating, which helps reduce discipline problems and gets the kids involved, and they're focused the minute they come in, something's on the board for them to see what they're going to do, you've got them captured psychologically, and they know that you're organized, and that's how you start.
We have some particularities of the Brazilian scenario of English, and we are concerned about them, and would like to hear from you what you could suggest to Brazilian schools and to collaborate with UNOi as well. How do we deal with the low number of hours of English?
That's a good question, and obviously, like playing basketball, the more you practice, the better you're going to be at it. And so if they don't have English, and I've been to some schools, I was at school this week, in fact, in Belo Horizonte, and that school had 2 hours of English a week with 30 kids in a class. Mm-hmm. And they decided, oh, it's too many kids, we're going to split the class to 15 and 15, and the kids get 1 hour of English a week. So I spoke to the director of English, the coordinator of English, and I said, did you think that maybe in that class of 30 kids, you set up 5 tables, centers, with 6 kids at each center with different activities, and you circulate, and the kids still get English 2 times a week, so they get their 2 hours, they're exposed to more English. And she said, oh, I didn't think about that. It would give them more time. So just by thinking outside the box, being more creative, if you have desks and don't have tables, So you put six desks, you know, 5 groups of 6 desks together, and at each you might designate one desk as one set of desks as a reading area, and you'll have different reading books, maybe big books, story books, depending on the age of the students. And while they're there, they're working on reading. You might have another one where maybe there's some vocabulary flashcards, where the kids are asking each other flashcards. There might be another one where there's some words that they're actually copying. If they're already into writing, please don't give any writing to preschool kids. So I don't want to give them dyslexia in 2nd and 3rd grade or primary. But when they get to 2nd grade or above, older kids too, they can start doing vocabulary exercises. It doesn't mean they're looking up things in dictionary. It may be that the teacher has some cards ready, or on iPad something projected with words and some meanings that the kids are matching up and asking each other visually and orally. And maybe the teacher's working with the 5th group, and when the teacher's maybe 20 minutes with that group goes on to do a different activity, and then the teacher goes to different groups, so that during an hour, a class, most classes have 55 minutes, that during that 55 minutes, the teacher will be able to cover 5 groups for a little bit more than 15 minutes each one, and still have a few minutes to introduce the class and close the class together. That use of teamwork, that use of centers is one option. There are others too, depending on the age of the student, of course, but one of the things I'm doing when I work with the schools is asking them, are you going to be planning for more English? And most of them are saying yes. Another thing that I was at a school this week, and they were complaining, the teachers were complaining they didn't have enough time for English. And they're using some of the techniques with centers and things, they're using their time wisely. And I said, you know, you can get more English in by taking some of the Portuguese materials, but teaching them in English. Your government will allow that. For example, if you have a course in technology using computers, and it's a Portuguese, hire an English teacher to teach it, so they're learning computers in English instead of in Portuguese. If you have a geography class, teach it in English instead of Portuguese. So you're getting in more English. It may not be an English class, but it can be material taught in English, which is part of CLIL philosophy, and it gets the kids more exposure to English.
Another thing that usually happens in Brazil is that some kids in a class take an English course somewhere else at a language institute, and other kids don't. So you have a big variety of levels, kids with different levels. How would you cope with that? How would you do the activities in order for them to be able to interact with each other?
I have a couple of comments about language institutes, okay? Language institutes have been around Brazil for like 50 years. Why then aren't there millions of people running around speaking English? I have an answer. My answer is the language institutes are focusing on grammar, passing exams to get into universities. They're not really building on oral fluency, which is part of our CLIL philosophy. So if I have a class and I've got kids that go to the language institutes in the afternoon, I know as a teacher that most of them are focusing on grammar, which means sometimes I get criticism from parents because I'm doing a lot of oral production and a lot of interactive production, and the parents might say, where's the grammar, where's the grammar? And so I tell the parents, grammar is an impediment to fluency. I want the students to speak English, because they can speak it, they can read it, they can write it, they can think in it, and then they're able to pass exams and they can think in it. If they're just memorizing rules, for example, I hear an extraordinary number of people in Brazil that know English quite well, pronouncing words, especially past tense verbs that end in ed, saying things like welcome it, look it, play it, apply it. And I know where that came from. It came from the rule of ed at the end of verbs. I didn't even know rules existed. We learn how to say the word correctly by copying people. Now obviously, some of the teachers don't have a high enough level of English to be able to do that, but in that case, as a teacher knowing, okay, I don't know Spanish. I'm very fluent in Spanish, I can read it, I can write it, but I never have studied in my life Spanish grammar, and I have no intention of studying Spanish grammar. But if I were stuck with a job having to teach Spanish, I would make sure I brought in some experts, that I used films, I used videos, I used audios to support what I'm saying to the kids, because my job as a teacher is to inspire kids to like a language, to learn about the language, to learn about the culture that happens in that language, to hear people say words correctly. And if I'm teaching past tense and looked, I say the word and I ask kids, what do you hear? Looked, painted, what do you hear? And maybe I'll give them a list of maybe 20 verbs that all end in ed, and we say them and we can put them into 3 columns, how they sound, not based on any rule. I don't want them to learn rules, I want them just start gradually starting to figure things out for themselves. And so in my class where I have some kids that are having all this grammar rules at an institute, and some kids maybe have traveled, not many, but some of them have traveled to the US and stayed 3 or 4 weeks and come back with some English, and some kids who don't know any at all. I have to teach. As a teacher, I have to aim to the highest level.
Can you leave us a final message for our other teachers here in Brazil?
Yes, please read aloud to your kids every day. I'm not talking only kindergarten. The kids need to hear some English. If you don't read well or you don't feel your English is good enough, there's lots of tapes. Get a book. For the older kids, get a book with chapters. Do a chapter a day. 5 minutes out of your 55 minutes, and they're listening for enjoyment. Not to teach vocabulary, not to ask them, gee, what did he say? No, just for enjoyment. They need to be listening. Or show a movie, show a film. They need to hear English, authentic books, movies, videos, YouTube, something every day. 5 minutes. That's it.